December 11th, 1943. 11:47 p.m. Falkenheim Forced Labor Camp. Altenbruck Subcamp, occupied Poland. 14 degrees below zero. A northeast wind at 18 kilometers per hour. New moon. Snowfall cutting visibility down to roughly 50 meters. The night silence of the camp allowed no cracks. It wasn't the ordinary silence of the free world, but a thick, supervised one, where even a poorly timed breath could turn into a sentence. It wasn't an absence of sound at all, quite the opposite. It was a constant choreography of measured, controlled noises. German boots crunching over hardened snow. The metallic groan of watchtowers rotating on rusted bases. Wind threading itself through barbed wire, enclosing 100 lives reduced to numbers. The snow had started falling 3 hours earlier, precisely at 8:43 p.m., as the women finished a 12-hour shift assembling ammunition in underground factories. The flakes came down heavy and dense, the kind that erased footprints within minutes and turned the world into a white surface where any movement left an unmistakable mark. Watchtowers cast pale yellow circles of light across the perimeter every 32 seconds, an automated, emotionless reminder. No one in, no one out. Inside the 7 wooden barracks where the prisoners slept, the cold seeped through every crack like a patient invader. The women lay packed together, 4 to bunks designed for 2, sharing what little body heat remained after months of systematic starvation. The smell defied naming: illness, damp wood, and the stale sweetness of death that never quite left. And yet, that night, something was different. It couldn't be seen or heard, but it hovered in the frozen air like a possibility no one dared to articulate. Heinrich Falk, 35, SS Corporal, had been assigned to the night patrol for 4 months. He moved toward the eastern side gate with the same automatic rhythm as always. Right foot, left foot, 17 exact steps from the tool shed to the gate. He'd counted them so many times his body repeated the sequence without thought. His Marsch Stiefel boots, standard issue 1939, crunched against the packed snow with a sound he could distinguish instantly from that of the other guards. A Karabiner 98K hung from his right shoulder, safety on. He never disengaged it during night rounds. The cold numbed the hands, and mistakes were expensive. His breath formed white clouds that vanished exactly 2 seconds after leaving his lungs. Heinrich knew every detail of the route with near-obsessive precision. He knew the 3rd plank of the tool shed squeaked when the wind came from the northeast. He knew Watchtower 4 had a blind spot measuring 4.2 meters near the side gate. He knew Otto Kramer, the guard who relieved him, was always 3 minutes late because he stopped to smoke before starting his shift. And he knew that the eastern side gate's padlock, manufactured in 1938 at a foundry in Essen and worn down by 5 Polish winters, required an exact pressure of 800 grams at the correct angle to fully engage its internal mechanism. He reached the gate at 11:47 p.m., as he did every night, with a margin of 22 seconds. He took the padlock in his gloved hand, a standard Wehrmacht black leather glove, torn at the left thumb for 3 weeks now. He inspected it for 4 seconds, the time prescribed by the camp's security manual, and he did not close it all the way. It wasn't a mistake. Before the war, Heinrich Falk had spent 8 years as a quality control supervisor in a textile factory. His mind was trained to detect deviations smaller than a millimeter in industrial fabric. To him, a poorly closed lock stood out as clearly as a spelling error to a schoolteacher. This wasn't distraction. He had repeated the same action for 37 consecutive nights, placing the padlock without applying the final pressure. 37 nights of conscious choice. 37 gestures of calculated betrayal. And no, it had nothing to do with mercy. Heinrich Falk had stopped believing in abstract ideas like compassion or goodness 2 years earlier, on the day he watched an SS officer force a Jewish father to choose which of his 2 children would die first. Mercy belonged to peacetime. This was something else, more direct, rougher, pure calculation. The cold reasoning of a man who had already accepted that he would probably not survive, but who still retained the ability to decide how he would face that end. As a passive cog in a machine built to destroy lives, or as someone who, however minimally and insufficiently, had tried to step off the prescribed path. The padlock sat in the hasp, tightened just enough to appear closed from a distance, yet without fully engaging the internal mechanism. If someone yanked it hard, they would hear the sharp crack of metal giving way. But someone who pushed slowly, hands shaking, heart pounding, would discover that the gate yielded outward in silence. Heinrich stepped back twice, checked the lock with an expert's eye, wrote a note in his patrol log, and moved on. His face remained still. No doubt, no fear, no hope. 200 meters north, in Barrack 14, Section B, bunk number 7, upper level, Elsa had gone 43 nights without truly sleeping. She wasn't fully awake either. The human body can't endure that long without rest, but it can exist in that narrow middle ground between wakefulness and half-sleep, where consciousness never shuts down. Every sound is weighed, every shadow assessed. Every deviation from the nightly pattern is filed away somewhere in the mind. A survival habit Elsa, once a seamstress in Benzine, had learned to cultivate. She was 24 years old, a fact she repeated to herself every morning so it wouldn't slip away. 24 years, 3 months, 17 days. She had been born on a Tuesday in August of 1919 in a 2-story house where her father repaired watches and her mother embroidered tablecloths they sold at the market on Sundays. She learned to sew at 7. By 14, she was better than her mother. At 18, she opened her own workshop. And at 23, when the Germans invaded Poland, her existence was reduced to a number tattooed on her left forearm, 407829. Before Altenbruch, she had spent 8 months in Auschwitz-Birkenau. She survived because her hands were useful. She sewed Nazi uniforms with stitches so precise they lasted 3 times longer than those made by other prisoners. That inherited skill bought her time. But in Birkenau, she learned something even more valuable than sewing. She learned how to observe. Observing wasn't the same as looking. Anyone could look. Observing meant detecting patterns, inconsistencies, anomalies. It meant noticing that a particular guard walked just a fraction slower on his rounds, that a bell ringing 3 seconds late meant the commandant was ill and executions would be postponed, that a change in the color of the smoke signaled the burning of the previous day's bodies was finished. After her transfer to Altenbruch in August of 1943, along with 200 other women, Elsa applied that same attention to her new surroundings. She memorized shifts, learned which guards beat prisoners for pleasure and which followed orders without enthusiasm, identified blind spots in the towers, knew when the food would be barely tolerable, knew which prisoners traded information and which worked for the SS. And for 43 nights now, she had begun to notice something different about the guard on the night patrol. She lay on her bunk, a 90-centimeter wooden plank shared with 3 other women, where sleeping required turning in unison because there was no room to move alone. From there, through a crack in the barrack wall exactly the width of her little finger, she could see a narrow slice of the yard outside. Barely 15 centimeters of vision, but it was enough. Every night, with an almost cruel regularity, at exactly 11:47 p.m., Elsa saw the same shadow slide past the side gate. It was the silhouette of the guard, a man whose name she never knew, but whose movements she learned with a watchmaker's precision. And yet, for 43 nights now, that pattern had shown a fracture. The guard reached the gate, stopped, checked the padlock. Elsa sensed it more than she saw it. The angle didn't allow her to see his hands, but she felt the pause, and then the patrol continued without the final metallic sound, without the full turn of the wrist the others always made. Just a suspended moment, an unfinished gesture, and he walked on. The first night she thought her mind was betraying her. Hunger causes visions. She knew that well. She had seen women talk to absences, weep for children dead for years, scream names in the middle of the night while fleeing ghosts only they could see. Cold deceives, too. It numbs the fingers, fills the ears with a constant ringing, makes the eyes invent dark stains drifting through the dark. And hope, on top of that, was the most dangerous luxury in a place like this. It pushed people into unnecessary risks, into believing in the impossible, into lowering their guard precisely when it needed to stay raised. The second night, Elsa watched more carefully. She memorized every movement, counted the seconds between each action. The guard took 17 steps from the tool shed to the gate, stopped, raised his right hand to the padlock, held it there for 4 seconds, lowered it, took 2 steps back, glanced toward the towers, and resumed his round. What never came was the sound. On previous nights, with other guards, Elsa had always heard the unmistakable click of the padlock fully closing, a brief but sharp noise that carried through the frozen air. With this man, that sound simply did not exist. The third night confirmed what she already suspected. The padlock was never fully locked. It sat in place, engaged, but without the final pressure that sealed the mechanism. That could only mean one of two things. Either he was the most incompetent guard the Wehrmacht had ever assigned to a camp, or he was doing it on purpose. That same night, Elsa woke Sarah Bloom. Sarah was 46 and had been a mathematics teacher in Bern. Her mind still worked like a calculating machine even as her body began to fail. When she heard Elsa's whisper, she didn't answer at once. She closed her eyes, ran numbers in silence, measured probabilities, risks, windows of time. Finally, she murmured, barely audible, 15 minutes. From the moment he passes until the next guard checks the perimeter. 15 minutes to cross 120 meters of open ground, open the gate without a sound, and reach the tree line. Running, 90 seconds. Moving low, 3 minutes. Time isn't the problem, the sound is, and the tower lights. Elsa swallowed and asked if she truly believed it was possible. Sarah opened her eyes. In her gaze was someone who had accepted death months ago, but who hadn't surrendered completely. "I think that guard wants someone to try," she said. "And I think that if no one does, he'll keep leaving that gate that way until he's discovered. And then they'll kill him." Falkenheim was a name that sounded neutral in the official paperwork. A simple labor camp, a re-education facility. But Nazi euphemisms never truly concealed what happened behind the barbed wire. By December 1943, the Falkenheim complex held more than 26,000 prisoners spread across 11 subcamps, forced into labor in granite quarries, armaments factories, and the construction of fortifications for the Eastern Front. The Altenbruch subcamp, where Heinrich Falk had been assigned in September of that year, was a minor cog in the machinery of destruction, but no less lethal for it. Around 1,400 Jewish women transferred from Auschwitz worked there, enduring 12-hour shifts assembling munitions for the Luftwaffe. Average life expectancy hovered at 5 months, not because of mass executions, as in the extermination camps, but due to something slower and more insidious: the systematic wearing down of the human body until it simply failed. Cold was the most efficient executioner. In winter, temperatures fell to 20 degrees below zero, and the women worked in torn summer clothing, their shoes little more than rags held together with wire. The daily ration barely reached 900 calories, thin soup at midday, and a piece of black bread at night. Bodies wasted away into skeletons wrapped in skin. Wounds refused to heal, infections ran unchecked. The guards were a mixed lot: young SS fanatics, battle-hardened Wehrmacht veterans, and older men deemed unfit for the front. Some beat prisoners for pleasure, others out of sheer obedience, and a few simply looked away, numbed by the routine of horror. Otto Kramer, 56, a veteran of the First World War, was one of those who had learned to disconnect what remained of his humanity in order to survive. He made his pre-dawn rounds with half-closed eyes, chain-smoking, barely seeing the prisoners at all. To him, they were numbers, shadows, expendable parts. Helmut Kranz was different. He was 32, a junior SS officer, ambitious, meticulous, and deeply distrustful. He had arrived at Altenbruch 3 weeks earlier as security supervisor, and from the first day began cross-checking patrol reports, reviewing inventories, interrogating guards over the smallest inconsistencies. What drove him wasn't cruelty, but something more dangerous: bureaucratic efficiency. Kranz genuinely believed in the system, and to him a system only functioned if every cog performed its role without deviation. Seated at his desk, lit by a kerosene lamp, he began to notice something odd in the night reports. Nothing dramatic, just small irregularities. The night patrol always ended at exactly 11:52 p.m., not a minute earlier, not a minute later, 5 minutes every time. In a military environment obsessed with punctuality, that kind of mechanical precision was suspicious. Kranz opened a folder and began noting dates, patterns, discrepancies. Something didn't fit, and Helmut Kranz lived by a personal rule: when something didn't fit, someone was lying. Heinrich Falk had not been born to be a killer. He came into the world in Augsburg, an industrial city in southern Germany, the son of a Lutheran carpenter and a schoolteacher. He grew up between Latin lessons, summer football matches, and Sunday services where the pastor spoke of loving one's neighbor. In 1933, when Hitler rose to power, he was 25 and working as a supervisor in a textile factory. He wasn't a committed Nazi, nor did he harbor hatred toward Jews. He simply didn't think much about politics. But in 1939, with the invasion of Poland and war no longer avoidable, he was drafted. He was handed a uniform, a rifle, a manual of orders, and sent east. For 2 years, he witnessed atrocities impossible to erase. He saw Einsatzgruppen execute civilians into mass graves, saw comrades rape women before killing them, saw high-ranking officers organize hunts in which prisoners of war were released for hours, only to be tracked and killed like animals. And none of it ever truly left him. And the most terrible thing was realizing that no one did anything to stop it. In 1942, after a piece of shrapnel tore into his left shoulder and left his arm partially crippled, Heinrich Falk was transferred to Falkenheim. It wasn't a promotion. It was a different kind of sentence. Being a guard in a concentration camp meant becoming an accomplice to a system designed to destroy lives methodically, not with gas chambers like Auschwitz, but through something slower and more cruel: the gradual erosion of human dignity, until death arrived almost as a relief. For the first months, Heinrich did what everyone else did. He obeyed without questioning, but something inside him began to crack. There was no single dramatic moment, no sudden awakening, just the accumulation of small daily horrors that, taken together, became unbearable. On November 28, 1943, 13 days before that December night, he found the frozen body of a girl lying by the fence. She couldn't have been more than 14. She had been dead for days, and no one had bothered to remove her. The crows had already begun their work. Heinrich stood there under the falling snow, staring at that small body, and something inside him broke for good. It wasn't compassion. It wasn't guilt. It was something simpler, more devastating. The absolute certainty that if he did nothing, anything, no matter how small or futile, there would be no difference between him and the men who had built that hell. That same night, he began to study the camp. He memorized schedules, identified blind spots, analyzed patrol routes. He discovered that the eastern side gate, hidden behind the tool shed, lay outside the tower's line of sight for exactly 15 minutes each night, between 11:47 p.m. and the shift change, when Otto Kramer made his slow, inattentive round. The gate's padlock was old, rusted, and required precise pressure to close fully. If left merely hooked, it looked secure, but with a careful push, it would give. For 3 consecutive nights, Heinrich left it that way and waited. No one tried. On the 4th night, he saw footprints in the snow. Someone had crossed, and then he knew he would do it again. Noah Feldman was 16 years, 2 months, and 11 days old. Those numbers mattered, because in Altenbruch, continuing to count time was a microscopic victory against a system designed to erase every trace of existence. She had arrived 4 months earlier from the Warta Ghetto, transported in a cattle car where 80 women were crammed into space meant for 20. The journey lasted 3 days. 18 died before arrival. Her mother, Rivka Feldman, 42, a literature and Yiddish teacher, died on the train. Not from hunger or illness. She fell asleep on the 2nd night and never woke up. Noah held her for hours, refusing to accept that the body that had given her life was now just inert weight in her arms. At the Auschwitz selection ramp, guards tore the corpse from her and threw it onto a pile of bodies already 2 meters high. Her father, Abraham Feldman, a carpenter, was separated from her at that same place. The last thing she saw was his bent back as he was shoved to the left, toward the line of men who would be sent to the gas chambers that very day. There was no goodbye, no final words. Just a rough, mechanical, irreversible separation. Her younger sister, Leah, 11 years old, disappeared during the first week in Altenbruch. In the morning, she worked in the packing section. By evening, her bunk was empty. Noah didn't ask the guards. She asked other prisoners. No one knew anything, or no one wanted to say. 3 days later, she stopped asking, having learned that some answers were worse than uncertainty. Now she was alone. Alone in the way you only are when you have lost literally everyone who tied you to the world. No aunts, no cousins, no childhood friends, all swallowed by the same genocidal machine. Noah Feldman was a human island adrift in an ocean of death, and for that very reason, paradoxically, she had nothing left to lose. She worked in the detonator assembly section for aerial bombs, a painstaking task that demanded small hands, sharp eyesight, and an unwavering touch. The detonators were metal cylinders no larger than a thumb, their internal mechanisms so sensitive that an error of 0.5 millimeter could trigger an explosion. 3 detonations in a single month in any section, were enough to send the entire production line to the gas chamber. It was an efficient way to maintain output. Fear proved far more persuasive than any incentive. That was why Noah had learned to work on autopilot, separating her mind from the horror around her, silently reciting Yiddish poems her grandfather had taught her before the war took him. Stiller, stiller, quieter, quieter, a poem about the night that protects children. A beautiful lie from a world that no longer existed. But on the night of December 11th, when Elsa and Sarah approached her bunk and whispered about the gate, Noah felt something she hadn't felt in months. Possibility. The word itself felt almost obscene in that place, as if the future could be something other than the next 12 hours, as if there might be an after beyond the walls. "Why me?" she asked, her voice rough, worn down by months of screaming without sound. Sarah looked at her with eyes sunken from seeing too much. The deaths of her husband, her 2 children, her mother, her sister, and yet still holding a hard, unblinking clarity. "Because you're young. Because you still have strength in your legs. Because your body isn't as destroyed as ours." She paused, choosing each word carefully, then added, "And because if this works, if there really is a way out, we need to know that someone can make it far. Those of us who are older." Sarah held out her trembling hands, fingers swollen with cold, joints twisted and misshapen. "I wouldn't make it to the trees. Elsa might manage 10 meters. But you—" She stopped, then finished quietly. "You might survive out there." Elsa took Noah's hand. Her fingers were icy, but the gesture carried a warmth Noah hadn't felt in months. The simple warmth of knowing that someone cared, whether you lived or died. "We're not forcing you," Elsa said. "This has to be your choice. But if that guard is leaving the gate that way, it's not an accident or negligence. It's deliberate. He's risking his life. If they discover it, they'll execute him. And if no one takes what he's offering, he'll keep doing it until they catch him, and he'll die for nothing." Noah looked toward the crack in the wall, toward the strip of night beyond the rotting planks, toward the watchtower whose light swept the perimeter in slow, hypnotic circles. "If they catch me, they'll kill me." "If you stay here, you'll die anyway," Sarah replied, with the brutal calm that comes only from fully accepting reality. "The difference is that out there, you have a chance. In here, there's only certainty. And in this place, certainty is always death." Noah closed her eyes. She saw her mother's face in the cattle car, her father's back as he disappeared down the ramp, the empty bunk where her little sister had slept. And she understood that Sarah was right. To die here or to die outside. The difference wasn't whether she would die, but how. And if she had to die, she would rather do it running toward something than waiting. She opened her eyes. When Sarah exchanged a look with Elsa, that silent language shared only by those who have survived hell together, they fixed the moment. Tomorrow night, 11:50 p.m. 3 minutes after the guard passes. That would give her 12 minutes before the next patrol. 12 minutes. Noah did the math in her head. It was enough. It had to be. Sarah squeezed her hand. 120 meters to the trees. Crouching, 3 minutes. Running, 90 seconds. But you can't run. The sound of your steps will alert the towers. So she would move quickly, but with control. And once she reached the trees, she wouldn't look back. She would head north and keep going without stopping. About 8 kilometers away, there were Polish villages, people who hated the Nazis, people who would hide her if she could reach them. "What if I don't make it?" Noah asked. Sarah didn't answer right away, because they both knew the truth. If Noah was caught, if the tower lights found her in the open field, she would be executed in public as a warning to the others. But Sarah didn't say that. Instead, she smiled. A small, sad smile, filled with a tenderness that hurt. "Then at least you tried," she said. "And in this place, that's the only victory we still have." That night, Noah didn't sleep. She lay staring at the cracked ceiling of the barrack, listening to the uneven breathing of the other women. Some moaned in their dreams. Some cried without waking. Others lay completely still, suspended in that nameless state between life and death. The cold seeped in through every crack, but she barely felt it. Her mind was busy running the plan over and over again. 120 meters, 12 minutes. Towers sweeping every 32 seconds. Eastern side gate. Stay low. Don't run until the trees. North. 8 kilometers. Polish villages. And one question she couldn't push away. Who was that guard? Why was he risking his life? What had happened to him to make betraying the SS worth it? She would never have answers. But that night she made herself a promise. If she survived, if she escaped, if the world ever became a place where life mattered again, she would remember that unknown man. Not his name, not his face, only his act. Because in a universe gone completely dark, someone had lit a light. And Noah Feldman was willing to run toward it, even if it was the last thing she ever did. Isaac Morgan, 29, didn't know he would be the first. He had no idea that 2 barracks away, 3 women were planning the same escape he himself had been considering for weeks. Isaac was from Nowy Sącz. Before the war, he had been a carpenter. Now he repaired structures inside the camp. He was one of the few men granted limited freedom of movement, which allowed him to notice what others missed. The eastern side gate was never fully locked. On the night of December 14th, 3 days after Heinrich Falk began his silent routine, Isaac decided he had nothing left to lose. His wife had died in Bełżec. His children had been gassed the day they arrived. He was still alive only because he knew how to fix things, and a life without purpose is just a slower way to die. At 11:50 p.m., he left Barrack 8, moved low through the shadows, reached the gate, touched the padlock with shaking hands, and pushed. It gave. Isaac held his breath and looked toward the towers. The lights swept the perimeter, but he was standing in a blind spot. He had maybe 2 minutes before the next patrol. He crossed the threshold, ran for the trees, and vanished into the Polish night. No one ever learned what became of Isaac Morgan. Nazi records make no mention of his escape, and later testimonies offer no confirmation of his fate. He may have frozen to death in the forest. He may have fallen into the hands of a patrol. Or he may have survived, changed his name, and lived the rest of his life in silence, refusing to speak of the night when a stranger opened a door to freedom. The only certainty is that someone crossed that gate, and that when Heinrich Falk checked his route at 5:30 in the morning, he found footprints in the snow leading toward the forest, and did not report them. He snapped a pine branch from a tree and carefully erased the tracks. Helmut Kranz was not a naive man. He had been trained to detect anomalies, and that guard, too punctual, too methodical, too perfect, was an anomaly made flesh. On the morning of December 15th, Helmut Kranz summoned Otto Kramer to his office. "Tell me, Kramer," he said, "have you noticed anything out of the ordinary during the night rounds?" Otto, weathered face, tired eyes, shook his head slowly. "Everything normal, sir. No incidents." "And the eastern side gate?" Kranz asked. You check it every night? Of course, sir. Kranz held his gaze a second longer than necessary. You're completely sure? Otto hesitated, just an instant, long enough for Kranz to register it. Tonight, Kranz said, you will personally accompany the base guard on his patrol and check every lock with him. All of them. Otto nodded and left with a knot in his stomach, not because he suspected Heinrich Falk, but because he himself had been falsifying reports for months. If Kranz began a real inspection, he would be exposed. Heinrich knew the margin was gone the moment he saw Otto waiting for him beside the guard barracks that night. The veteran's expression said everything. Kranz suspects something, Otto muttered. They ordered me to walk with you. Heinrich nodded without a word, slung his rifle, adjusted his cap, and stepped into the cold with Otto at his side. The patrol unfolded exactly as always, step by step, check by check, until they reached the eastern side gate. Heinrich took the padlock, inspected it, and for the first time in weeks, closed it completely. The metallic click shattered the silence. Otto glanced at him from the corner of his eye, but said nothing. They returned without speaking. Heinrich completed his report, signed off, and walked to his bunk, convinced that this had been the last night he would ever help anyone. What he didn't know was that Sarah Bloom had been watching. She saw the two guards together and understood, with the mathematical logic that never abandoned her, that the system had detected the anomaly. The gate would be properly locked that night, perhaps only that night. In Barrack 14, Sarah gathered Elsa and Noah. Not tonight, she said calmly. He couldn't leave it open, but he'll try again. I'm sure of it. How do you know? Noah asked. Because a man who risks his life once doesn't give up at the first obstacle. He waits, and so do we. For the next 5 days, Heinrich carried out his patrol under Otto's constant supervision. He locked every gate correctly, signed every report with microscopic precision, and became the perfect guard the system demanded. And every night, as he closed that rusted padlock, he felt a weight in his chest that had nothing to do with the cold, only the certainty that he had failed, and that the women who had trusted his silent breach were once again condemned. Then, on December 21st, Otto Kramer was transferred to the Western Front. It wasn't punishment, just redistribution. The Wehrmacht needed men to contain the Allied offensive in Italy, and a 56-year-old veteran was considered more useful in a trench than guarding prisoners. That same night, Heinrich made the round alone. At 11:47 p.m., he reached the eastern side gate, hooked the padlock without fully engaging it, and walked on. Elsa saw it through the crack in the wall and knew the chance had returned. At 11:52 p.m., Noah Feldman slipped out of Barrack 14, wearing every layer she owned: 2 torn shirts, a frayed sweater, a coat taken from a prisoner who had died 3 days earlier, and in her pocket, a piece of hard bread she had saved for 2 weeks. She moved low through the shadows. The north wind swallowed the sound of her steps, and the tower lights swept the perimeter in their predictable rhythm. She reached the gate, touched the padlock, pushed. It gave. She didn't look back. She didn't think of Sarah or Elsa or the other women who had made that moment possible. She simply ran, toward the tree line, toward the absolute darkness of the Polish forest. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs stopped obeying, and even then she kept going. 3 hours later, 20 kilometers from the camp, she collapsed beneath a snow-covered fir tree, her body shaking uncontrollably. Her feet were bleeding inside ruined shoes, but she was alive, and more than that, she was free. In the weeks that followed, The eastern side gate continued to open at night. Sarah Bloom began to organize a system. Not every night, not predictably. Every 3 or 4 days, when conditions allowed, when patrols were distracted, when the snow fell heavily enough to erase footprints, she would choose one woman. And that woman would cross the gate. Not all of them survived. Some froze to death in the forest. Others were captured by Nazi patrols. But a few, the strongest, or simply the luckiest, reached Polish villages where Catholic families risked their own lives to hide Jews. The camp records never reflected these escapes. Not because of Nazi negligence, but because Sarah had discovered something ingenious. Morning roll call listed prisoners who died overnight from illness or exhaustion as natural deaths. So if one woman vanished and another died in the barracks, Sarah switched the numbers. On paper, the escapee was dead. The dead woman had succumbed to typhus. It was an imperfect, dangerous system, but it worked. For 2 months, until Helmut Kranz ordered a full count. On the morning of February 15, 1944, he had all the prisoners assembled in the main yard. This was no routine inspection. It was a census. Every woman identified by her tattooed number, every record cross-checked. And Kranz discovered that 17 were missing. They weren't in the infirmary. They weren't listed as deceased. They simply weren't there. He summoned all the guards to his office, his face rigid with contained fury. "Someone has been facilitating escapes," he said. "And when I find out who, he will be executed publicly as a warning." Heinrich Falk kept his expression neutral. He didn't sweat. He didn't tremble. He simply waited. Kranz interrogated every guard. He reviewed night reports, cross-referenced schedules, analyzed inconsistencies. 3 days later, he found the pattern. Every escape coincided with a night Heinrich had been on duty. Every disappearance occurred on his shift. It wasn't coincidence. It was evidence. On the night of February 18th, Kranz ordered his arrest. There was no trial, no defense, only an execution scheduled for dawn. They tied Heinrich to a post in the center of the camp and forced all the prisoners to watch. The firing squad formed in front of him, and Helmut Kranz read the sentence aloud. For treason against the Third Reich, for aiding the escape of enemies of the state, for sabotage of camp security. Corporal Heinrich Falk is sentenced to death. Heinrich looked toward the horizon as the sun began to rise between the trees, the snow shimmering with a pale pink light. For the first time in months, he felt something close to peace. He knew that 17 women had crossed that gate, and that at least some of them were still alive. The squad raised their rifles. Kranz lifted his hand and shouted, "Fire!" The bullets tore through Heinrich's chest. His body slumped against the post. Blood stained the snow. In Barrack 14, Sarah Bloom and Elsa wept in silence. Not for themselves, but for the man who had died so that others might live. Noah Feldman never learned the name of the guard who saved her life. She survived by hiding in barns and cellars with Polish families until the Red Army liberated the region in January 1945. After the war, she emigrated to Palestine. She became a nurse. She had 3 children, 9 grandchildren, and 17 great-grandchildren. And every December 11th, the anniversary of the night she crossed the gate, she lit a candle. She never knew whom she was honoring. She only knew that someone, somewhere, had decided that her life was worth more than his own safety. Sarah Bloom and Elsa Kahn were transferred to Bergen-Belsen in March of 1944. Neither survived. They died 2 weeks before the camp was liberated, victims of the typhus epidemic that swept through the barracks in the final days of the war. Before she died, Sarah whispered something to Elsa. 17 women, 17 worlds saved. And Elsa, eyes closed, her voice barely audible, answered that it hadn't been 17. It was all the lives those women would have, all the children who would be born, all the futures that would exist because someone chose to leave a gate open. Helmut Kranz survived the war. He was captured by the Soviets in 1945 and sentenced to 15 years of forced labor in Siberia, where he died in 1953 without ever mentioning Heinrich Falk's name. Otto Kramer was killed fighting in Italy in March of 1944. The Altenbruck subcamp was evacuated in January of 1945. As Soviet troops approached, the buildings were set on fire and the records destroyed. For decades, no one knew that there, in a forgotten corner of Poland, an SS guard had committed treason against the most brutal regime of modern history. Not to save thousands or alter the course of the war, but to open a gate each night and give someone the chance to choose. There are no statues of Heinrich Falk. No plaques bear his name. He does not appear in Holocaust museums because history rarely has room for men who were accomplices and rescuers at the same time. But somewhere in Israel, a 97-year-old woman named Noah Feldman still lights a candle every December. And when her great-grandchildren ask whom she is praying for, she answers through tears that it is for the man who taught her that even in hell, someone can choose to leave a door open. Heinrich Falk left the eastern side gate not fully locked for 67 nights. He enabled the escape of at least 17 Jewish women. He was executed at the age of 35 for treason against the Third Reich. History forgot him, but those 17 women remembered. And their descendants are alive today because one man, standing inside the most lethal machine ever built, decided that his conscience was worth more than his life. It was not enough. It never is. But it was something. And sometimes, in absolute darkness, that something is all that can be offered.